Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Today we're going to be looking at the ever-growing Saudi Arabian metal scene, how it went from underground, and I mean underground, to international recognition. We're going to find out the history and talk about the bands and the promoters that are pushing the scene forward. Just like the rest of the Middle East, in the late 80s and early 90s, the Saudi Arabian metal scene was very quiet. It was all based on tape swaps. And generally speaking, the few fans and musicians that were there had to keep things very quiet. But in the mid-90s, basically during a drought of rock and metal, there was a band that made some noise. Sound of Ruby. I mean, looking back at it and doing some research, these guys might have been the only rock band in the country at that time.
طبعا النايتيز كنا صغار، كان الاغاني المشهوره مايكل جاكسون والراب اللي MC هامر والاشياء هذه. بس بعدين صار في الثوره حقت الروك اللي هيرو سميث، البوم جيت جريب والبومات فتره الجرانج اللي بالنايتيز البدايه، والالترناتيف روك واللي كانوا بالايتيز اندر جراوند صاروا ميجر بالنايتيز، بالاضافه لاغاني المصارعه واغاني الجيتارات.
Armed with these new influences that they just found and a brand new guitar, Sound of Ruby started performing these songs for friends and family. But the majority of people that saw Sound of Ruby perform at that time, they had no idea what they were listening to.
حتى اللي كانوا يشوفون مع الجيتار وشو هذا اورج، يعني ما يعرفون حتى اسمه. ما كان في فرق. اول 5 سنين كانت عباره عن عزله، كنا انا والدرامر فقط، يعني ما في، واللي يجون اصدقائنا يستغربون من اللي قاعد نسويه، يعني يقولوا وشو هذا، يعني الصوت وش الأغاني هذه.
Back in those days, rock and metal was very controversial, meaning you could risk backlash from authorities or your community just for being too open about it. And reports of fans being detained for wearing metal t-shirts or having an appearance that didn't align with the country's culture was not uncommon.
It was very risky, actually. Actually, we got in trouble. You know, our guitarist, he got in trouble, you know, with the religious police, with Hayat. One time they took his guitar where he was walking, you know, after a rehearsal, and they made some big problem for us about that. And you know, what kind of music do you guys play? What is this? Is it, you know, Satanism? And things were really insane at that time.
But even with all of that, that didn't really stop them. The bands were few and far between, and the fans were scattered all over the place, but they were persistent. And the scene slowly started to grow.
بدأ شوي يكبر الكوميونتي، ويصير في ناس تحب الروك والميتال معا، تحب ظهور نيو ميتال لمبسكت وكورن والاشياء هذه، صار في حب للروك والميتال.
And with the internet now at their fingertips, the Saudi Arabian bands and fans went online to try and find each other.
والبيسست حقنا كمال أسس منتدى أيام منتديات عام 2000 سماه SA ميتال. فهذا اللي جمع المحبين الروك والميتال في المملكة تحت سقف واحد. يعني شفنا إن في فرق ثانية بعد عام 2002 اكتشفنا إن في فرق بجدة والرياض، صرنا نسوي جيجات برايفت لوكال، ويجون الشباب نعزف نتعرف على بعض. يعني المنتدى والإنترنت هو اللي وصلنا للكوميونتي حقنا.
Forums like SA Metal allowed the local bands and fans to find each other and connect, creating that community. But when social media became a little more popular, bands over there started using it to find a wider audience, an audience from around the world. Wasted Land, who was formed in the early 2000s, are often credited as the band that best utilized tools like MySpace to gain that wider audience.
Back then احنا نتكلم دحين صاحبي 2005 2006.
لسه السوشيال ميديا ما طلعت بالقوه اللي
ما هي زي السوشيال ميديا، لسه فيسبوك ما كان هناك موجود
بالضبط
لسه. وانا كان عندي حساب زمان في ماي سبيس، واعتقد اغلبنا كان عنده حسابات ماي سبيس اللي كانوا يدخلوا اونلاين. هو الشيء اللي كان بيجمع الناس
هو الفيسبوك او الانستغرام ديك الايام.
Even though it was basically illegal to be making that kind of music in that country at that time, the bands now had a way to promote it outside of the country. The issue is, and this is not locked to Saudi Arabia, especially at that time, recording metal was very difficult. And finding an engineer or a producer that can record metal in a country that doesn't have a metal scene was very difficult. So most of the musicians had to figure out how to do it themselves with the tools that they could find.
Recording was a nightmare. Literally, it was a nightmare at the time. you know, things were not, you know, as easy as now. We had so many, you know, tries to record our music, but it all failed because we didn't have the equipment. Things, you know, were more complicated at the time to record music.
في البدايات هو كان عنده زي الدرام ماشين كذا يحطها بيعزف عليها كذا بيده.
طحت
ايه فهذا ذاك ايه. فقلنا احنا لا نبغى نروح ليفل بروفيشنال اكثر. انا رحت اشتريت جهاز افكت لاين 6 بود.
يجي كذا كانه فاصوليه،
يعني كان انه مره ابجريد وقتها، كان شيء توب نوتش تكنولوجي وشيء واو وقتها. اللي حصل انه طلع امكانيات اللاين 6 اعلى من البي سي اللي احنا نسجل فيه. كانت الرامات ما هي كومباتبل مع الجهاز، فاللي كان بيحصل كل ما احنا كنا بنسجل فجأة هي يمكن 5 minutes كذا وبعدين يطلع الصوت، بعدين الجهاز يطلع صوت ويقعد خلاص فريز كذا، ونقعد نستنى يسوي ريستارت وبعدين نبدأ نسجل مرة ثانية ونفس الشيء.
But like we said, recording was difficult for everybody at that time, all around the world. But one of the other things that the Saudi Arabian bands faced was they didn't have rehearsal spaces. They didn't have anywhere to jam. The way the country and the culture is set up, you couldn't have your cliche garage band. And the worry about offending other people that might hear the music if you play it in a house or something was very real.
The biggest obstacles that we faced actually as a band, for us when we started, I would say a place to rehearse. That was a big issue, and I think it is still an issue for most of the bands currently.
Regardless of all these obstacles, the Saudi Arabian musicians persisted. More and more metal bands started to form, and having spoken to a lot of them, they all cited Sound of Ruby, the first rock band, as their influence for starting a band.
فهم شافونا احنا مؤسسين فرقه، فقال بسوي باند بس ما راح اعزف يعني روك، بعزف متل الشيء اللي احبه. بس فكره تاسيس الفرقه يعني احنا نوع بطريقه او ما اثرنا فيهم انه ياسس باند، يعني امسك الجيتار لا تخاف، اعزف الف، شوف اللي زيك، مارس هوايتك. فهذا الشيء اللي خلى الفرق المتل تحبنا وتحترمنا، وبجيجاتنا مثلا نروح جمهور متل يحبونا.
And when they're talking about live shows, it's not what you're imagining. There was no venue with a stage with lights and monitors and a mixing desk that would welcome that kind of music in the whole country. So just like they did up until now, DIY, they built it themselves.
Basically, we couldn't play live shows at the time. You know, things were really different, you know, and here in the scene and society and all of that. There was no way that you play metal music, you know, live. I wouldn't say it's shows. I would say, you know, just, you know, gatherings of friends and all of that. So people, you know, everybody's inviting everyone and all of that. And, you know, we used to play live with other bands that was here at Riyadh.
Even though it wasn't accepted, there were a few that tried to put on legitimate shows and have these bands perform on a real stage and sell some real tickets. But that came with its own set of issues.
كانت الحفلات صعبة في تلك الأيام إنك تسويها، صعبة إنك أنت تسويها، كانت كلها underground.
There was an incident that happened actually for a big gig that happened here in Riyadh, where, you know, the main issue, it was, you know, related to tickets, and, you know, they didn't get permit to sell tickets, you know, so they got in trouble. But actually, you know, it was all over the internet, you know, about Satanism. Look, there is Satanism in Riyadh and all of that, and it wasn't like that, you know. But unfortunately, at the time, you know, the mentality was totally different at that time. So it was very risky.
Now, while the Saudi Arabian scene was struggling with restrictions, just across the border in the United Arab Emirates, there was a company called CSM that started putting on the Dubai Desert Rock Festival. We talked a little bit about Dubai Desert Rock Festival in the last video because I believe it was a pillar in the Middle Eastern metal scene. But one of the things that came with Dubai Desert Rock Festival was a battle of the bands called Shamal, which allowed bands from all over the region to compete to be able to share the stage with the likes of Iron Maiden, Machine Head, Chimera, and a whole lot more.
وقتها لما رحنا احنا هناك دبي جينا حنعزف ولسه تعرف طالعين على الستيج وشفنا قدامنا في حوالي يمكن قدامنا 1000 شخص، فجأة كلهم قاعدين يقولوا ويستد لاند.
لسه دوبنا طالعين في الستيج، يعني لسه ما سوينا performing والناس شانتينج أصلاً.
الناس بدأوا يقولوا لنا اعزفوا لنا ديث الوار، الناس يقولوا اعزفوا لنا انتو كايوس. قلت انا في الشباب مش يعرفهم بغنينا بقى. طلع انه الناس كانوا بيسمعون لنا عن طريق ماي سبيس،
يعرفونا كاشخاص، يعرفوا الاغاني حقتنا، يعرفوا الانفورميشن حقتنا، والناس في ناس جات اوريدي محضره، صاروا فان اوريدي من قبل ما يجوا، فهذا فاجانا شيء.
And that was the foundation for what became the interest in the Saudi Arabian metal scene. Now that you have bands sharing stages with humongous international acts, you have the recording being better and it being spread online, media started paying attention and they started wanting to conduct interviews with these Saudi Arabian bands to find out a little more about what it was like being a metal band in a country that doesn't really allow it. And as with everything in this video, the bands powered through, but there was a little bit of backlash. But we'll save that one for part 2. Make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you on the flippity flop.